Arizona Territory, 1878. The setting sun painted the vast canyon in hues of amber and gold, a beauty that went unappreciated by the lone rider who approached its edge. The Grand Canyon yawned before him, a gaping wound in the earth that mirrored the hollow feeling in his chest. Adam Garrison pulled his chestnut stallion to a halt, dust swirling around the horse's legs as he stared into the immense void before him. At 25, he'd already seen too much death, too much loneliness on the frontier to believe in much of anything anymore. Nothing but empty space as far as the eye can see, he murmured, adjusting his worn Stetson. Just like the rest of life out here. Adam had lived by one truth since the war: the West was no place for connection. People died, moved on, or betrayed you. The only reliable companion was solitude, and he'd made peace with that. Or so he told himself as he made camp that night, the stars impossibly bright above the canyon rim, mocking him with their beauty that no one else was there to share. The railroad company had hired him to scout potential routes for a bridge spanning one of the canyon's narrower sections, an impossible task by the looks of it, but Adam didn't care about impossibilities. He just needed the money to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of his memories and the ghosts that followed him from town to town. Morning brought the harsh reality of his assignment into sharper focus. Standing at the canyon's edge, surveying the sheer drop, Adam pulled out his notebook and began calculating measurements. The company wanted to connect the northern and southern rims to transport cattle and goods without the 3-day detour currently required. An impossible task, but they were paying well for his assessment. Whoever thinks they can bridge this gap is a fool, he muttered, sketching the terrain, but he'd take their money all the same. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flash of blue fabric against the red rock about half a mile downriver. Adam squinted against the morning glare. A figure stood at the canyon edge, too far to make out clearly but unmistakably human. Curious, he packed his supplies and mounted his horse, riding toward the unexpected visitor. As he approached, the figure came into focus, and Adam felt a jolt of surprise. A young woman stood at the precipice, her dark blue dress billowing gently in the breeze. She seemed completely absorbed in sketching on a large pad balanced against her knee. What caught him most off guard wasn't just finding someone else in this remote location, but the fact that she stood barely 5 feet from a 1,000-foot drop with seemingly no concern for the danger. Adam cleared his throat loudly as he approached, not wanting to startle her. The woman turned, revealing a face that caused him to pull his horse up short. She was beautiful, not in the painted, showy way of saloon girls, but with a natural grace that seemed incongruous with the harsh landscape. Her hair, a rich dark brown with natural highlights that caught the sun, was pulled back loosely, with several strands escaped to frame her face. She appeared to be about 20 years old, with bright, intelligent eyes that regarded him with curiosity rather than fear. "Good morning," she called, completely unfazed by his arrival. "Are you with the survey team?" Adam dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "Yes, ma'am, Adam Garrison, hired to scout routes for the railroad." He glanced at her sketchbook. "You're a fair piece from civilization. Dangerous country for anyone to be alone in, especially." A woman, she finished his sentence with a knowing smile that suggested she'd heard similar concerns before. "I'm with the Smithsonian expedition." Willow Jameson, botanical artist. She extended her hand with confidence that took him aback. Adam shook her hand awkwardly, noticing the smudges of charcoal on her fingers and the practical leather satchel at her feet that contrasted with her proper dress. "You're documenting plants?" he asked, glancing around at the sparse vegetation. "Among other things." She turned her sketchbook toward him, revealing not plants but an intricate drawing of the canyon itself, with geological formations meticulously detailed. "The Smithsonian wants comprehensive documentation of the Western Territories, plants, animals, geographical features." Adam studied her drawing, impressed despite himself. "That's remarkable work." "Thank you." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Our camp is about 3 miles east. I come out each morning to catch the light." She gestured to the canyon. "It changes the rock formations completely." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Adam wasn't accustomed to casual conversation, especially with educated Eastern women. He shifted his weight, ready to excuse himself, when Willow's expression suddenly changed. "Look out," she cried, lunging forward. Before Adam could react, she grabbed his arm and yanked him backward just as the edge where he'd been standing crumbled away, sending rocks tumbling into the abyss below. His heart hammered in his chest as he realized how close he'd come to following those rocks down. "The rim is unstable in places," Willow explained, releasing his arm. "You have to watch for the fracture lines." She pointed to subtle cracks in the stone. "See there and there." Adam stared at her, momentarily speechless. This woman had just saved his life while he, a seasoned frontiersman, had been oblivious to the danger. "I owe you my thanks," he finally managed. Willow shrugged. "Just returning the favor in advance. These canyons are treacherous. I'm sure a man like you will have the opportunity to save me from something equally deadly before long." Her eyes sparkled with humor that caught him off guard. "You speak of deadly danger with remarkable cheer, Miss Jameson." "Life is too short for constant worry, Mr. Garrison." She began gathering her supplies. "Besides, I've found that most things out here, animals, weather, even the landscape, follow patterns. Learn the patterns and you reduce the danger." As she packed her sketchbook, Adam noticed a small pistol holstered at her waist, partially hidden by her shawl. This woman was full of contradictions, refined artistic talent coupled with frontier practicality. "Will you be heading back to your camp now?" he asked. "Soon. I have a few more specimens to collect first." She hesitated, then added, "Our expedition leader, Professor Bradley, has extensive surveys of this region. He might have information useful for your railroad project." Adam considered this. Sharing information went against his solitary nature, but practical considerations won out. "I'd be obliged if you'd introduce me." "Join me for supper at our camp this evening," she offered. "The professor enjoys having new ears for his geological lectures." Against his better judgment, Adam found himself accepting the invitation. As he rode away, he puzzled over his decision. People were complications he didn't need, especially educated Easterners who wouldn't last a season out here. Yet something about Willow Jameson's fearless approach to the wilderness intrigued him. That evening, Adam approached the Smithsonian camp with uncharacteristic nervousness. It was larger than he expected: 4 canvas tents, a wagon, and a proper cooking fire where an elderly man stirred a large pot. A younger man sat cataloging specimens, while Professor Bradley, a bearded gentleman in his 60s, enthusiastically greeted Adam. "Mr. Garrison, Miss Jameson mentioned you're surveying for a potential railroad bridge." "Fascinating prospect," the professor pumped his hand vigorously, "though I must say the geological challenges are considerable." Willow appeared from one of the tents, having changed into a simpler dress of forest green. Her hair was now completely down, falling in waves past her shoulders. Something twisted in Adam's chest at the sight of her, a feeling he quickly suppressed. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. The expedition cook had prepared a venison stew that rivaled any Adam had tasted. The conversation flowed easily, with Professor Bradley dominating much of it with theories about the canyon's formation. Adam found himself drawn into debates about practical matters of construction and terrain, surprised by how much he was enjoying the intellectual stimulation. Willow spoke less than the others, but observed everything with keen attention. When she did contribute, her comments were insightful, demonstrating knowledge of both science and practical frontier matters. As the evening progressed, Professor Bradley spread maps across a portable table, showing Adam surveys they'd already completed. "The challenge isn't just the span," the professor explained, "but finding bedrock stable enough for foundation work. That's assuming they can even transport building materials to this location," Adam noted, tracing potential routes on the map. "The railroad men are determined," Willow said quietly. "They'll find a way even if nature resists." "Nature always resists," Adam replied, more sharply than he intended. "That's the one truth of the frontier: it doesn't want us here." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Professor Bradley cleared his throat. "Well, the hour grows late. We have an early start tomorrow." As Adam prepared to leave, Willow walked with him to his horse. The night had turned cool and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You don't believe in conquering the wilderness, Mr. Garrison?" she asked. Adam adjusted his saddle. "I believe in respecting it. Most troubles come from men thinking they can bend the land to their will instead of learning to live within its terms. Yet you're helping plan a bridge that will cut across one of nature's greatest creations." I'm doing a job I was hired to do, he corrected. Whether they should build it is another matter. Willow studied him in the moonlight. You're a contradiction, Mr. Garrison. You speak like a man who loves this land, yet you carry yourself like someone passing through. Her perception unnerved him. Not all of us have institutions like the Smithsonian backing our wanderings, Miss Jameson. Some of us just survive. And is that enough, she asked softly, just surviving? The question struck too close to the empty space Adam carried within him. He mounted his horse without answering, tipping his hat. Thank you for the meal and the maps, they'll be useful. Our expedition will be mapping the eastern rim for another 2 weeks, she said. You're welcome to join us again if your work brings you that way. Adam nodded, unable to admit to himself that he hoped it would. Over the next several days, Adam found his survey work repeatedly intersecting with Willow's collecting routes. Each time he told himself the meetings were coincidental, yet he couldn't deny the anticipation he felt upon seeing her in the distance, sketchbook in hand. She worked with focused intensity, documenting plants and rock formations with scientific precision. Sometimes she would simply sit at the edge of a cliff, legs dangling over the vast emptiness, sketching the canyon's layers. Her fearlessness both impressed and concerned him. On their third encounter, Adam found himself sharing his noon meal with her, simple hardtack and jerky that she accepted gratefully. What brings an educated woman to the Arizona territory? He asked as they sat in the shade of a juniper tree. Surely the Smithsonian has safer places to document. Willow smiled, taking a sip from his canteen. My father was an army surgeon. We moved from fort to fort across the frontier until he died of fever when I was 16. By then, I had already fallen in love with the landscapes and was documenting them in my sketchbooks. So you returned to what you knew. In a way, she traced patterns in the dust with a twig. After father died, I was sent back east to live with an aunt in Philadelphia. It was suffocating. When I saw the Smithsonian advertisement seeking artists for their Western documentation project, I applied immediately. She looked up at him. They weren't planning to bring women, but my portfolio convinced them. Your talent is undeniable, Adam acknowledged. What about you? She asked. What led you to become a surveyor? Adam tensed, uncomfortable with personal questions. War has a way of teaching a man to read terrain, he said simply. Understanding crossed her face. You fought in the conflict. He nodded, expecting the usual prying questions about battles and heroism. Instead, Willow simply said, that explains your eyes. My eyes. They see everything but expect the worst. She held his gaze. That's a heavy burden to carry across this beautiful land. Something in her directness made evasion impossible. Beauty doesn't keep you alive, Miss Jameson. Vigilance does. Perhaps both are necessary, she suggested. Vigilance for survival, beauty for living. The distinction struck him. When had he stopped living and merely started surviving? Their conversation was interrupted by distant thunder. Looking up, Adam saw storm clouds building rapidly over the western rim. We should seek shelter, he said, gathering their things. These summer storms can be violent. Willow nodded, quickly packing her sketching materials. There's a rock overhang about a quarter-mile east that provides good cover. They reached the sheltered alcove just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The small cave-like space offered perfect protection, with a natural stone bench along one wall. As they settled in, the sky opened up completely, creating a curtain of water that transformed the landscape. Adam built a small fire near the entrance, more for light than warmth in the summer air. The intimate setting made him acutely aware of Willow's presence, the floral scent of her hair, the graceful way she arranged her skirts as she sat. I love desert rainstorms, she said, watching the downpour. Everything transforms so quickly. The plants unfurl, animals emerge, dry washes become rivers. And people get stranded, Adam added pragmatically, though there was no real annoyance in his tone. Willow laughed, a clear sound that echoed pleasantly in their stone shelter. Is my company so terrible? No, he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. It's not terrible at all. As the storm continued, they talked. Really talked in a way Adam hadn't done with anyone in years. Willow told him about her studies, her dream of publishing a book of Western botanical illustrations. He found himself sharing stories of his travels, the magnificent vistas he'd witnessed, the frontier characters he'd encountered. "What will you do when you finish this survey?" she asked as the rain began to ease. Adam poked at the fire. "Move on to the next job. There's always someone needing land assessed or routes mapped." "Always wandering," she observed. "Never settling. Settling requires something worth settling for. And you haven't found that." He looked at her then, really looked at her, this remarkable woman who faced the wilderness with both scientific precision and genuine wonder. For a dangerous moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, one with roots, with connection. "I've learned not to look," he said finally. The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. As they emerged from their shelter, a rainbow arched across the canyon, spanning the impossible gap that Adam had been tasked with bridging. Willow gasped at the sight. "Now that," she said, "is nature's bridge." "Beautiful but temporary," Adam replied, though he too was struck by the spectacle. "Most beautiful things are," she said quietly. When they parted ways that afternoon, something had shifted between them. Adam found himself looking forward to their next encounter with an eagerness that both confused and alarmed him. Attachments were dangerous on the frontier, especially to someone who would eventually return east to her civilized life. Yet the next day, he deliberately routed his survey work to pass near where the Smithsonian team had established their day camp. And the day after that, each time, Willow greeted him with genuine pleasure that made something long dormant stir within him. On the fifth day, disaster struck. Adam was measuring distances along a ridge when a distant cry caught his attention. Following the sound, he came upon a scene that turned his blood cold. Two members of the Smithsonian expedition, the young cataloger and the cook, were frantically trying to stabilize a section of collapsed rock wall. Below them, halfway down a steep slope, Willow clung to a protruding root, her specimen bag still clutched in one hand. The ledge gave way beneath her, the young man explained breathlessly as Adam dismounted. "We've tried to reach her, but the whole section is unstable." Adam assessed the situation quickly. The slope was nearly vertical in places, with loose shale that would give way under any significant weight. Willow had fallen about 30 feet and managed to catch herself, but she couldn't climb back up without assistance. "Hold on, Miss Jameson," he called down. "I'm coming for you." He removed his boots for better grip and took only a coiled rope from his saddlebag. With meticulous care, he began descending, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Twice, sections of rock crumbled beneath him, sending cascades of stone into the canyon below. When he finally reached her, Willow's face was scratched and her hands bloodied from gripping the rough root, but her eyes showed relief rather than panic. "My hero," she said with a weak attempt at her usual humor. "I was beginning to think I'd have to climb out myself." "Can you hold on while I secure a rope?" he asked, finding a stable position beside her. She nodded. "I'm more embarrassed than injured. I should have recognized the unstable edge." Adam worked quickly, creating a harness from the rope and securing it around her waist. "We all miss things sometimes," he said, thinking of how she had saved him from a similar fate days earlier. With the rope secured, he signaled the men above to start pulling. "Ready?" he asked Willow. She nodded, but as she released the root and put weight on her right leg, she gasped in pain. "My ankle, I think it's sprained." Adam immediately adjusted his plan, positioning himself to take her weight. "Put your arms around my neck," he instructed. "I'll support you." The climb up was harrowing. Adam found footholds for both of them, bracing himself against the unstable slope as the men above gradually pulled on the rope. Willow clung to him, her face pressed against his shoulder, trying not to cry out when her injured ankle bumped against the rocks. When they finally reached the top, Adam's muscles burned with exhaustion. He gently lowered Willow onto level ground where the others immediately attended to her. "We need to get her back to camp," the young cataloger said, examining her swollen ankle. "It doesn't appear broken, but she can't walk on it." "I'll take her," Adam said without hesitation. "My horse can carry us both." Despite her protests that she could manage, Adam lifted Willow carefully and placed her on his horse, then mounted behind her. With one arm securely around her waist, he guided the horse back to the Smithsonian camp at a gentle pace. Professor Bradley was beside himself with concern when they arrived. My dear girl, what happened? He fussed as Adam carried Willow to her tent. The usual hazards of field research, Professor, she replied with forced lightness. Fortunately, Mr. Garrison has a habit of appearing when ledges collapse beneath me. As the expedition's medical officer examined her ankle, Adam waited outside, inexplicably reluctant to leave. The image of Willow hanging precariously over the abyss kept replaying in his mind, along with the absolute terror he had felt at the thought of losing her. Losing her, when had she become his to lose? Professor Bradley emerged from the tent, looking relieved. Just a sprain, thank the Lord, she'll need to stay off it for at least a week. He clasped Adam's hand warmly. We owe you a tremendous debt, young man. Anyone would have done the same, Adam said uncomfortably. May I see her? The question surprised him as much as the professor. Inside the tent, Willow lay on her cot, her ankle wrapped and elevated on a folded blanket. Her face brightened when Adam ducked through the entrance. There he is, my canyon guardian, she said, attempting to sit up. Stay still, Adam admonished, taking a seat on a small stool beside her. You're lucky it's just a sprain. Yes, Dr. Garrison, she teased, though he could see pain in her eyes despite her brave front. What's the prognosis for the railroad bridge? Will it happen? Adam shrugged. It's possible with enough money and manpower. I've identified 2 potential crossing points where the span would be manageable. So you're almost finished with your work here, she said, a statement rather than a question. Nearly, he confirmed, feeling a strange reluctance at the thought of leaving, and your expedition moves on soon as well. Once I can travel, she nodded. We're headed north to document the plateau region. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken questions. Finally, Willow reached for her sketchbook on the table beside her. I want you to have this, she said, carefully removing a page and holding it out to him. It was a drawing of Adam himself, standing at the canyon's edge, his face in profile against the vast landscape. The detail was extraordinary, the set of his shoulders, the weathered lines around his eyes, even the way the wind moved his hair beneath his hat. But what struck him most was how she had captured something in his expression that he hadn't known was visible, a longing, a searching quality as he gazed out at the wilderness. I don't know what to say, he managed, genuinely moved. You don't have to say anything, she replied softly. Just remember that someone saw you, really saw you. In that moment, Adam felt something shift inside him, like a stone dislodging from a dam wall. The careful barriers he'd built around himself since the war began to crumble. I should let you rest, he said, carefully tucking the drawing into his shirt. Willow caught his hand before he could rise. Will you come back tomorrow? The vulnerability in her question pierced him. Yes, he said simply, I'll come back. True to his word, Adam returned to the Smithsonian camp each day for the next week. He continued his survey work in the mornings, then spent afternoons with Willow, who chafed at her confinement but welcomed his company. Sometimes they played chess on a small portable board, other times they simply talked, sharing stories and ideas that revealed their different backgrounds yet increasingly similar perspectives. Professor Bradley, observing their growing attachment, took Adam aside after several days. Miss Jameson is like a daughter to me, he said carefully. Her spirit is her greatest strength but also leaves her vulnerable. I understand your concern, Professor, Adam replied honestly. But I have no intention of hurting her. Intentions and outcomes are often different things, especially out here, the older man said with the wisdom of experience. She will return east eventually. The Smithsonian expects her to compile her work for publication in Washington. The professor's words were a painful reminder of reality. Whatever connection was forming between them had a natural endpoint, one approaching all too quickly as Willow's ankle healed and his survey neared completion. On his final evening at the camp, Adam found Willow sitting outside her tent, finally able to walk short distances with a cane the cook had carved for her. The sunset painted the canyon in spectacular colors that even now, after weeks of witnessing them, still took his breath away. It's done, he said, taking a seat beside her. My report and maps are complete. Willow nodded, her eyes on the horizon. When do you leave? Tomorrow, the company's expecting my findings in Flagstaff by the end of the month. He hesitated. The expedition moves on soon too, I imagine. 3 days, she confirmed. North to the plateau, then eventually back east for the winter months while I prepare the illustrations for publication. The inevitability of their parting hung between them. Adam struggled to find words for the conflict raging within him, the lifelong habit of moving on versus the unprecedented desire to stay. "I've never met anyone like you," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "You see beauty and opportunity where I've only seen danger and survival." Willow turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. "And you understand the true soul of this land in a way I'm still learning," she said softly. "We make a good team, Mr. Garrison." "Adam," he corrected. "After pulling you from a cliff face, I think you can use my given name." She smiled. Adam. The sound of his name on her lips sent a warmth through him that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. "And I'm Willow." "Willow," he echoed, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to reach for her hand. Instead, he asked the question that had been building for days. "What happens when you finish your work with the Smithsonian?" She looked surprised. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. Return to Philadelphia, I suppose, or perhaps seek another expedition." "Would you consider," Adam paused, the words unfamiliar and difficult. "Would a life out west appeal to you, permanently?" Willow's eyes widened as she understood what he was really asking. "It would depend," she said carefully, "on what or who was part of that life." Adam took a deep breath. "I've spent years believing that attachments are dangerous on the frontier, that caring for someone is a weakness that gets you killed out here." He met her gaze directly. "You've made me question that belief." "Is that a good thing?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'd like to find out." Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, Adam leaned forward and kissed her. Her lips were soft against his, hesitant at first, then responding with a warmth that made his heart pound. When they parted, Willow's cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with emotion. "I'm not asking for promises," he said quickly. "We've known each other barely 3 weeks, but when your expedition concludes, perhaps we could write. See where this leads." Willow reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "I would like that very much." The next morning, their parting was bittersweet. Adam had expected to feel trapped or panicked by the commitment they'd discussed, but instead found himself experiencing something unfamiliar: hope. They exchanged addresses, his the general delivery at a Flagstaff hotel he frequented between jobs, hers the Smithsonian Institution in Washington. "Until our paths cross again," Willow said, standing with the help of her cane as he mounted his horse. "They will," Adam promised with newfound certainty. "This land has a way of bringing people back together." As he rode away, the morning sun at his back, Adam realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward rather than backward. The prospect of letters from Willow, of seeing her again, gave him something he'd lacked since the war, a future worth anticipating. The months that followed transformed Adam's solitary existence. Willow's letters arrived with remarkable regularity despite the challenges of frontier mail service. Her words painted vivid pictures of her continuing expedition, the wonders she documented, and her growing certainty that the West had captured her heart completely. In turn, Adam found himself sharing thoughts and feelings he'd never expressed to anyone, his memories of the war, his hopes for finding a place to settle, his growing conviction that his future included her. With each exchange, the connection between them deepened, transcending distance and circumstance. Winter found Adam in Denver, taking temporary work with a land surveyor's office while snow made field work impossible. It was there that a telegram arrived that changed everything. Returning west with private commission, stop ARRIVING Denver Central Station, January 15, stop, hope to see you, stop Willow. Adam read the message repeatedly, scarcely believing his good fortune. After nearly 6 months of correspondence, they would finally see each other again. The 3 weeks until her arrival passed with excruciating slowness. On the appointed day, he waited at the station, uncharacteristically nervous, wondering if their connection would translate from letters back to reality. The train arrived in a cloud of steam, passengers disembarking into the crisp winter air. And then she was there, Willow in a forest green traveling suit, her dark hair tucked beneath a fashionable hat, scanning the platform anxiously. When their eyes met, her face illuminated with a smile that erased all Adam's doubts. They came together like two parts of a whole, his arms encircling her waist as hers went around his neck. "You came," he said, the simple words containing a wealth of emotion. "Of course I came," she replied. "How could I stay away?" Over dinner at Denver's finest restaurant, Willow explained her presence. "The Smithsonian was pleased with my work, but I received a more interesting offer. The Western Pacific Railroad Company wants comprehensive documentation of the territories their lines will cross, botanical, geological, and cultural." "Another expedition?" Adam asked, trying to hide his disappointment at what sounded like more temporary arrangements. "A permanent position," she corrected, her eyes sparkling. "They're establishing a scientific department in Denver to map and document their expansion. I would lead the illustrative team." Adam's heart leaped. "You'd be based here?" "In Colorado." "If I accept," she nodded, "though my decision might depend on certain, personal considerations." Their gaze held across the table, the implication clear. "What sort of personal considerations?" Adam asked, needing to hear her say it. Willow reached across the table to take his hand. "I've spent months thinking about our conversations by the canyon. About what you asked me if I could see a life for myself in the West." She took a deep breath. "The answer is yes, Adam. I can see that life clearly now, with you, if that's still what you want." "It is," he said without hesitation. "More than anything." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of discovery as they built a life together in Denver. Adam secured a position with the same railroad company, his practical knowledge of the terrain complementing Willow's scientific approach. They found a small house near Cherry Creek, with enough garden space for Willow to grow specimens and a study where they could both work on their respective projects. By spring, Adam knew with absolute certainty that the connection they shared was one that came along once in a lifetime. On a mild April evening, he took Willow riding into the foothills, to a ridge overlooking the vast plains to the east and the towering mountains to the west. There, as the setting sun gilded the landscape, he knelt before her and took her hands in his. "Willow Jameson, you taught me that gaps can be bridged, not just in canyons but in hearts. You showed me that the frontier isn't just a place of survival, but of beauty and connection." He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Willow's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." They were married that June in a small ceremony attended by Professor Bradley, who had traveled from Washington for the occasion, and a handful of new friends from Denver. The celebration was held in their garden, where Willow had already established an impressive collection of native plants. As they danced under lantern light, Adam held his bride close, still marveling at how thoroughly she had transformed his life. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. Willow looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the same wonder he felt. "Completely," she assured him, "though I'm already planning expeditions for us. There are still so many corners of this territory to document." Adam laughed. Most wives would be planning curtains or dinner parties. "You didn't marry most wives," she reminded him with a smile. "You married a botanical artist with a passion for dangerous cliffs and unexplored canyons." "Thank God for that," he murmured, lowering his lips to hers. In the years that followed, Adam and Willow Garrison became known throughout the Colorado Territory for their comprehensive surveys and beautiful documentation of the western landscape. Their collaborative work helped guide the expansion of railways while also preserving knowledge of the natural world that was rapidly changing with settlement. They still spent summers in the field, mapping and documenting remote areas, but always returned to their home in Denver, which had grown to include a proper studio for Willow's artwork and a nursery for their daughter, Clara, born 2 years after their wedding. On Clara's 5th birthday, they took her to see the Grand Canyon for the first time. Standing at the rim where they had first met, with their daughter between them, Adam and Willow watched the sunset paint the vast chasm in colors no artist could fully capture. "Is this where you saved Mama from falling?" Clara asked, her small face serious beneath her hat. "Actually," Willow corrected with a smile at Adam, "this is where Mama saved Papa from falling. The first time, anyway." "We saved each other," Adam said, putting his arm around his wife's waist. "And we discovered that even the widest gaps can be bridged when you find the right person to build with." As they stood together, a family against the backdrop of the immense canyon, Adam reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a solitary man convinced that the frontier was no place for connection, to a husband and father who had found his home not in a place, but in the hearts of those he loved. The impossible gap had been bridged not by iron and steel, but by something far stronger, love that had transformed survival into truly living.